The cabin was dead silent, save for the hum of the auxiliary power and the nervous shuffling of 100 passengers. Outside, on the tarmac of JFK International, the red and blue strobe lights of 3 police cruisers bounced off the wet fuselage of Flight 492. Inside first class, Flight Attendant Beatrice Reynolds stood with her arms crossed, a smug grin plastered on her face, convinced she had won. She had just ordered the man in the hooded sweatshirt off her plane, but she didn't know that the man, Adrian Cross, hadn't just texted his lawyer. He had just texted the CEO of the airline, and the plane wasn't waiting for takeoff anymore. It was waiting for her termination papers. The rain at JFK International Airport was relentless, a grey curtain that seemed to wash away the colour of the world outside the terminal windows. It was a miserable Tuesday evening, the kind where the humidity clings to your skin and everyone seems to be nursing a headache. For Adrian Cross, the weather matched his mood perfectly. He had just spent 48 hours in a windowless boardroom in Tokyo, negotiating the acquisition of a microprocessor firm that was essential for his company's new aerospace navigation systems. He hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours. He was running on stale coffee and adrenaline, and now that the deal was signed, the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Adrian wasn't wearing his usual bespoke Italian suit. He had changed in the lounge bathroom into a charcoal grey cashmere hoodie and a pair of comfortable joggers. To the untrained eye, he looked like a college student flying home for the holidays, or perhaps an off-duty mechanic. He certainly didn't look like the founder of Cross Aero, a tech giant valued at $40 billion. And that was exactly how he liked it. He adjusted his backpack, slinging it over one shoulder as he approached the gate for Flight 492 to London. He just wanted to sleep. He had booked seat 1A, first class, window. He needed the privacy. He needed the silence. "Boarding Group 1, the gate agent announced, her voice crackling over the intercom. Adrian moved forward, his boarding pass displayed on his phone. He kept his head down, pulling the hood up slightly to block out the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. At the jet bridge door stood Beatrice Reynolds. Beatrice had been flying for 20 years, and in her mind, she ran the aircraft. She was the gatekeeper, the judge, and the jury. She had a sharp, angular face and eyes that constantly scanned passengers, assessing their worth based on their shoes, their watches, and their posture. To Beatrice, first class was a sanctuary for the elite, people who looked the part. When Adrian stepped onto the plane, Beatrice didn't greet him with the warm smile she was trained to offer. She blocked the aisle with her hip, pretending to adjust a stack of napkins on a trolley. "Excuse me," Adrian said softly, his voice raspy from exhaustion. Beatrice looked up, her eyes narrowing as they swept over his hoodie. She didn't see the $400 price tag on the cashmere. She just saw a hoodie. She didn't see the limited edition watch tucked under his sleeve. She just saw a young black man who looked too comfortable. "Boarding pass!" she snapped, not moving out of the way. Adrian sighed, holding up his phone. The screen clearly displayed 1A, first class. Beatrice squinted at the screen, then looked back at him, her eyebrows arching skeptically. She snatched the phone from his hand, a violation of protocol, but Beatrice didn't care about protocol when she felt she was right. She zoomed in on the screen, checking the date, the flight number, looking for any sign of a forgery. "Seat 1A, she muttered, her tone implying it was a mistake. She handed the phone back with a careless thrust. "You're in the wrong line, sir. Economy is through the second aisle." "I know where economy is," Adrian said, his patience already fraying. "But my seat is 1A. That's right here." He pointed to the spacious leather seat just to his left. Beatrice let out a sharp, incredulous puff of air. "We have a full flight today, sir. Systems glitch all the time. Just because you have a digital stub doesn't mean you belong in that seat. Did you upgrade with points? I paid cash, Adrian said, stepping around her. He didn't have the energy for this. He just wanted to sit down. Wait, Beatrice barked, turning to face him. You can't just... But Adrian was already dropping his bag into the overhead bin. He sat down in 1A, buckling his belt immediately and putting on his noise-cancelling headphones. He closed his eyes, signaling the end of the conversation. Beatrice stood there, fuming. She smoothed her uniform skirt, her face flushing a blotchy red. She hated being ignored. She hated when people she deemed unworthy occupied her premium cabin. In her mind, Adrian was a glitch, an upgrade mistake, or someone playing the system. Fine, she whispered to herself, turning back to the door as more passengers trickled in. Get comfortable while you can. The boarding continued. A steady stream of businessmen in suits, families with tired children, and tourists dragging overstuffed carry-ons passed by. Adrian remained asleep, or at least in a deep doze, trying to shut out the world. About 10 minutes later, a commotion at the door roused him. It was a loud, booming voice. I don't care what the app says, Beatrice. I always sit in 1A. You know this. I specifically requested it. Adrian cracked one eye open. Standing at the galley entrance was a man who looked like a caricature of wealth. He was wearing a tan suit that was a shade too bright, a pink tie, and he was holding a gold-rimmed tumbler that he had likely brought from the airport bar. This was Preston Hargrave. Adrian recognized him instantly. Preston was a mid-level venture capitalist who had made a small fortune investing in a dating app 5 years ago, and had been riding that wave ever since. He was known in business circles as the Peacock, because he was all show and very little substance. He was also a notorious bully. Beatrice was beaming at him. Her demeanor had shifted from icy gatekeeper to sycophantic servant in a split second. Mr. Hargrave, so good to see you again, Beatrice cooed, placing a hand on his arm. I saw your name on the manifest, but I thought you were in 2B today. 2B? Preston scoffed, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. I don't do second row, Beatrice. I need the leg room. I have meetings the second we land. I need 1A. He pointed a manicured finger directly at Adrian. And who is that? Preston asked, his lip curling in disgust. Since when do we let the ground crew sleep in first class? Adrian didn't move. He didn't take off his headphones. He simply watched the interaction through half-closed eyes. Beatrice leaned in, whispering loudly. I know, Mr. Hargrave. It's a mess. System error, I believe. He claims he paid, but, well, look at him. Get him out, Preston demanded, tossing his jacket onto the empty seat across the aisle. I'm not sitting in 2B while some kid in a hoodie takes my spot. Fix it, Beatrice, or I'm calling corporate. Beatrice straightened up, a look of determination hardening her features. This was her chance to restore order to her cabin. She tapped Preston on the shoulder. Leave it to me, Mr. Hargrave. Take a seat in the lounge for a moment. I'll handle this. She turned and marched toward seat 1A. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor was sharp and deliberate, like a gavel striking a sounding block. Adrian sighed, pausing his music. He knew peace was no longer an option. Beatrice loomed over Adrian, casting a shadow across his face. She didn't use the polite crouch that flight attendants usually employed to speak to seated passengers at eye level. Instead, she stood tall, asserting her dominance. Sir, she said, her voice dripping with false politeness. I need to see your boarding pass again. Adrian slowly slid his headphones down around his neck. He looked calm, but his eyes were cold. I already showed it to you, Beatrice. Is there a problem? She bristled at the use of her first name, even though it was pinned to her lapel. "The problem, sir, is that there has been a duplicate booking. The gentleman who just boarded, Mr. Hargrave, is a Diamond Medallion member and a frequent flyer on this route. This is his usual seat." "That sounds like a problem for Mr. Hargrave," Adrian said evenly. "I purchased this ticket 3 days ago, full fare. I'm not moving." "It's not a request," Beatrice said, her voice rising slightly. Other passengers in first class were starting to look up from their tablets and magazines. "We have an overbooking situation. As per airline policy, we prioritize our status members. Mr. Hargrave has priority." This was a lie. Adrian knew it. Airline policy regarding overbooking had a hierarchy, yes, but it didn't involve kicking a paying first-class passenger out of their seat after they had already boarded, just because someone with a shiny card wanted it. If the seat was double-booked, the gate agent would have caught it before Adrian scanned his pass. "Show me the policy," Adrian challenged. "Show me where it says you can remove a seated passenger because his friend wants the seat." Beatrice's face flushed darker. "I don't have to show you anything. I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. I manage the cabin. Now, I have a seat available in economy comfort. It's an exit row. Plenty of legroom. I can move you there, and we can offer you a voucher for $50 for the inconvenience." Adrian actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. $50? To move from first class to economy on a 7-hour flight? You're joking. "It is the best I can do," Beatrice insisted. "Mr. Hargrave is waiting." "Let him wait," Adrian said, putting his headphones back over his ears. Beatrice reached out and physically pulled the headphones off his head. The cabin went silent. A woman in seat 3C gasped. Touching a passenger was a major line to cross. Adrian slowly turned his head to look at her hand, then up to her eyes. The air temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Don't touch me." Adrian enunciated every word with lethal precision. Beatrice pulled her hand back, realizing she might have gone too far, but she was too deep in her power trip to back down now. She saw Preston Hargrave watching from the galley, tapping his foot impatiently. She needed to perform. "Then move," she shouted, losing her composure. "You are disrupting this flight. You are being non-compliant. If you do not grab your bag and move to row 24 right now, I will have you escorted off this plane by security." "On what grounds?" Adrian asked, unbuckling his seatbelt. He didn't stand up to leave. He stood up to face her. At 6'2", he towered over her. "I haven't raised my voice. I haven't been aggressive. I have a valid ticket. You are harassing me because you want to give a favor to your friend." "You are aggressive right now," Beatrice accused, stepping back and playing the victim. "You're threatening a crew member." "I'm standing up because you're screaming in my face," Adrian said. He looked past her to Preston. "And you? You really need this seat that bad, Preston?" Preston stepped into the aisle, buttoning his jacket. "It's Mr. Hargrave to you, and yes, I do. I paid for the service that comes with this cabin, something you clearly don't understand. Why don't you take the voucher, kid? Buy yourself a new hoodie." A few passengers chuckled nervously. Others looked uncomfortable. Lydia Cole, a young woman sitting in 2A across the aisle, spoke up. "He was here first. He has the ticket. This isn't right." "Stay out of this, honey," Preston sneered. Beatrice turned to Adrian. "Last chance. Row 24. Or I call the pilot and the police." Adrian looked at Beatrice, then at Preston. He realized this wasn't going to end with logic. They were banking on him being powerless. They saw a young black man in a hoodie and assumed he would fold under the pressure of authority. He reached into his pocket. Beatrice flinched, as if expecting a weapon. Adrian pulled out his phone. "Call the pilot," Adrian said calmly. "Actually, bring him here. I want Captain Harrison to explain to me why I'm being removed." "How do you know the captain's name?" Beatrice demanded, suspicious. "I read the placard when I walked in," Adrian lied smoothly. He unlocked his phone and opened his text messages. "Go ahead. Get the captain. I'll wait." Beatrice scoffed. "Fine. You want to do this the hard way? We'll do it the hard way." She spun on her heel and marched toward the cockpit door, punching the code into the keypad with aggressive stabs of her finger. Preston smirked at Adrian, leaning against the bulkhead. "You're making a big mistake, pal. You're going to end up on the no-fly list. All for a seat?" Sad. Adrian didn't respond to Preston. He was typing a message. Recipient: David Sterling, CEO, Orion Airways. Message: Flight 492, JFK to LHR, being removed from 1A by F.A. Reynolds, so Preston Hargrave can sit here. They threatened security, grounding the flight. He hit send. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Harrison emerged. He was a grey-haired man with a weary face, looking annoyed at being dragged out of his pre-flight checks. Beatrice was whispering frantically in his ear, gesturing wildly at Adrian. Captain Harrison adjusted his cap and walked over to row 1. He looked at Adrian, taking in the casual clothes, then looked at Preston in his suit. The bias was immediate and visible. "Son," the captain said, his voice deep and authoritative, "Beatrice tells me you're refusing crew instructions." "I'm refusing an unlawful order to vacate a seat I paid for," Adrian corrected him. "Look," the captain sighed, checking his watch. "I have a slot time to hit. I don't have time for a debate. The flight attendant has authority over the cabin. If she says you need to move for operational reasons, you move. If you don't, you're interfering with a flight crew. That's a federal offense." "Operational reasons?" Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Is Mr. Hargrave a federal air marshal? Is he a relief pilot?" "No. He's a venture capitalist who thinks he owns the plane." "I don't care who he is," the captain snapped. "I care about getting this plane in the air. You are the delay. Now grab your bag, go to row 24, or get off my plane. Those are your options." Adrian looked at the captain. "So you're sanctioning this? You're putting your name on this decision?" "I am," Captain Harrison said. "Now move." Adrian nodded slowly. "Okay." He picked up his backpack. Preston let out a loud, triumphant laugh. "Smart choice, kid." Adrian didn't move toward economy. He stepped into the aisle and looked at the captain. "I'm not going to economy. I'm getting off the plane. But if I get off, this plane doesn't take off." "Is that a threat?" Beatrice shrieked. "Did you hear that? He threatened the plane." "It's not a threat," Adrian said, checking his phone. A reply had just come through. "It's a promise. Because, legally, this aircraft cannot fly without the owner's authorization." "The airline owns the plane." Preston laughed. "You're delusional." Adrian turned the screen of his phone towards them. It wasn't a text message anymore. It was a digital contract, a leasing agreement header. "Orion Airways operates this plane," Adrian said, his voice projecting clearly through the silent cabin. "But Cross Aero owns the fuselage, the engines, and the navigation lease. I'm Adrian Cross, and I'm revoking the flight clearance for this aircraft effective immediately." The silence that fell over the first-class cabin was heavier than the humid air outside. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum where sound seemed to have ceased existing. For 5 agonizing seconds, the only audible thing was the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers battling the rain on the cockpit glass behind Captain Harrison. Beatrice Reynolds blinked. Once. Twice. Her brain, wired for years of standard airline hierarchy, where she was near the top and Passengers in hoodies were at the bottom, refused to process the information Adrian had just delivered. It was like trying to run sophisticated new software on an ancient computer. Her system just crashed. Preston Hargrave was the first to break the silence, and he did it with a noise that was halfway between a snort and a choke. "Bullshit!" Preston spat, though his voice lacked its earlier booming confidence. He looked Adrian up and down, his eyes darting nervously now. "You're lying. I know what CEOs look like. I have lunch with them. They don't look like you." "What do they look like, Preston?" Adrian asked softly, taking a step closer. "Do they look like you? Loud, cheap suits and desperation?" Captain Harrison found his voice, though it was tighter than before. He glared at Adrian, not with authority now, but with the frustration of a man whose schedule was disintegrating. "Son, impersonating a corporate officer to interfere with a flight crew is another felony to add to the list. Do you have any idea the kind of trouble you're in?" "He's clearly insane, Captain." Beatrice jumped in, her voice shrill and shaking. She clutched her tablet like a shield. "He's delusional. We need Port Authority on board immediately. He's a security threat now." Adrian didn't shout. He didn't need to. He just held up his phone again. He tapped the screen 3 times. "Captain Harrison," Adrian said, his tone conversational, almost bored. "Look at your flight management computer. Right now." Harrison frowned, hesitant to take orders from a passenger, but something in Adrian's unwavering gaze unnerved him. He glanced back over his shoulder into the cockpit. His co-pilot was staring at the instrument panel with wide eyes. "Captain," the co-pilot called out, his voice cracking over the short distance. "We just got an ACARS message. Top priority. Red flag status." Harrison stepped back into the cockpit, leaning over the center console. Beatrice leaned in from the galley, trying to see. "What does it say?" Beatrice whispered harshly. Harrison straightened up slowly. His face, previously flushed with annoyance, had gone a pale, sickly grey. He looked at the message, looked at the back of Adrian's hooded head, and then looked at Beatrice with an expression of pure horror. "It says," Harrison swallowed hard. "It says, aircraft lease agreement status changed to inactive immediately by Lessor Cross Aero Technologies. Authorization code Charlie Alpha 999. All engine start protocols are locked pending legal review." The captain looked at Adrian, really looked at him for the first time. He saw past the hoodie. He saw the intelligence in the eyes, the expensive watch, the absolute calm of a man who held all the cards. "Charlie Alpha 99, Adrian repeated. "My personal override code. The engines won't start, Captain. Not unless you want to hotwire a $100 million aircraft and commit grand larceny against my company." Lydia Cole, the young woman in seat 2A who had defended Adrian earlier, suddenly gasped. She had been furiously typing on her phone under a blanket. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. She held up her phone. The screen showed a Forbes article titled, "The Quiet Titan: How Adrian Cross Built a $40 billion Empire Before 30. The photo accompanying the article showed Adrian wearing a sharp navy suit, receiving an award. But the eyes, the jawline, they were unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers began whispering, craning their necks. The phrase, "That's him," and 40 billion bounced around the seats like ping-pong balls. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face to her feet, her stomach twisted into a painful knot. She looked at Preston, the man she had thrown away her career to impress. He was staring at his shoes, suddenly finding the carpet patterns incredibly interesting. He looked small, defeated. But Beatrice couldn't accept it. If she accepted it, she was finished. Her 20 years of seniority, her pension, her reputation as the Iron Lady of the Skies, gone. Denial was her only refuge. "It's a trick," Beatrice insisted, her voice high and tight, bordering on hysterical. She grabbed the captain's arm, digging her nails into his uniform sleeve. "Don't you see? He's a hacker. He hacked the system. People like him. They do things like that. We cannot let him get away with this terrorism." "Beatrice, stop!" Captain Harrison hissed, trying to pry her fingers off his arm. "No, I will not stop. I run this cabin." She spun toward Adrian, her face contorted with venom. "I don't care who you pretend to be. You are garbage. You are disruptive trash, and you are getting off my plane." She snatched up the cabin interphone handset, punching the button for the gate agent. "Get security down here, now! We have a level 4 threat in first class. I want him in handcuffs." She slammed the handset back into its cradle so hard it cracked plastic. Adrian just watched her meltdown with clinical detachment. He shook his head slightly. "You really should have just checked the manifest properly, Beatrice." The arrival of the Port Authority Police Department at JFK is never a subtle affair. They don't stroll, they swarm. Within 4 minutes of Beatrice's frantic call, the jet bridge shook with the heavy footsteps of authority. 3 officers, clad in dark blue uniforms slick with rain, burst through the cabin door. Their hands were resting near their holsters, their eyes scanning for a threat. The lead officer, Sergeant Kowalski, was a large man with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense demeanor, bred from years of dealing with drunk tourists and irate business travelers. He saw the scene. A crowded first-class aisle, a flight attendant looking like she was on the verge of a stroke, a flustered captain, and a man in a hoodie standing calmly in the center of it all. Kowalski's training kicked in. Identify the disruptor. Secure the scene. Listen to the crew. "All right, break it up!" Kowalski boomed, his voice filling the cabin. "Who's the problem here?" Beatrice lunged toward him like a drowning woman reaching for a life preserver. "Him! Officer, thank God you're here!" she gasped, pointing a shaking finger inches from Adrian's face. "This man. He refused crew instructions. He became aggressive. He threatened the safety of the aircraft. He claims he disabled the plane. He's a lunatic." Kowalski turned his attention to Adrian. In his experience, the guy in the hoodie arguing with the flight attendant was almost always in the wrong. "Sir," Kowalski said, stepping into Adrian's personal space, his hand resting heavily on his belt. "You need to grab your bags and come with us off the aircraft immediately. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Preston Hargrave, sensing a shift back in his favor now that men with guns were present, puffed his chest out again. "About time," he sneered. "Get this thug out of here so we can fly. He's been terrorizing poor Beatrice for 20 minutes. Adrian didn't flinch at the officer's proximity. He didn't raise his hands in surrender, nor did he make any sudden movements. He just maintained eye contact with Kowalski. "Officer Kowalski," Adrian said, reading the name plate, "before you put hands on me, I suggest you ask Captain Harrison exactly what threat I made." Kowalski frowned, not used to suspects giving him advice. He looked over at the captain. "Captain? What's the story? Did he threaten violence?" Captain Harrison looked miserable. He was caught between his lead flight attendant, the police, and the terrifying reality on his flight computer screens. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Well, not violence per se," the captain stammered. "But he refused to vacate a seat when instructed by the lead attendant. And then he claimed to have interfered with the aircraft systems." "He didn't claim it, Captain," Adrian corrected calmly. "I did it. The lease on the avionics package has been suspended. You have no navigation systems. This plane is a devastatingly expensive paperweight until I say otherwise." Kowalski looked at Adrian like he had just claimed to be the king of Mars. "Son, have you been drinking? Or are you on something? You can't just turn off a plane with your phone." "I can when I own the company that built the off switch," Adrian said. Beatrice shrieked. "See, he's admitting it. He's confessing to sabotage. Arrest him." Kowalski moved. He grabbed Adrian's left wrist, pulling it behind his back in a practiced motion, pulling out a pair of zip-tie cuffs with his other hand. "All right, that's enough. You're under arrest for interfering with a flight crew and making terroristic threats. Turn around." The cabin erupted. "No." It was Lydia Cole again. She stood up in her seat, holding her phone high. The red recording light was blinking steadily. "You have to listen to him. He's telling the truth. He's Adrian Cross." Other passengers joined in. The tension that had been brewing against Beatrice's high-handed behavior finally boiled over. "The flight attendant started it," a businessman in 3D yelled. "She tried to kick him out for that guy in the cheap suit. He hasn't done anything wrong," another passenger shouted. Suddenly, 5 or 6 phones were raised in the air, all recording the scene. The lenses were pointed not at Adrian, but at Beatrice and Sergeant Kowalski. Kowalski hesitated. He hated being filmed. It complicated everything. He loosened his grip slightly on Adrian's wrist. "Officer," Adrian said, his voice low and urgent near Kowalski's ear. "Look at the phones. This is already live streaming. Do you really want to be the guy who arrested the CEO of a major defense contractor because a flight attendant wanted to give a seat to her boyfriend? Think about your pension, Sergeant." Kowalski froze. The words defense contractor and pension hit home. He looked at Beatrice, who was practically foaming at the mouth with demands for an arrest. He looked at Preston, who was shrinking away from the cameras. He looked at the captain, who was staring at the floor. Then, the sound of running feet echoed up the jet bridge again. But these weren't heavy police boots. These were the frantic, clicking heels of corporate panic. A woman in a severe black suit burst onto the plane, followed closely by a man holding a tablet and looking like he was about to throw up. It was the airline's JFK station manager, Sarah Jenkins. Behind her was a frantic-looking man from Orion Airways corporate legal department. "Stop!" Sarah Jenkins yelled, breathless. "Everybody stop right now. Officer Kowalski, let him go, immediately." Kowalski dropped Adrian's wrist like it was red-hot iron. He stepped back, hands raised defensively. "I was just following the crew's instructions, ma'am." Sarah ignored him. She ignored Beatrice. She walked straight up to Adrian, who was casually rubbing his wrist where the officer had grabbed him. Sarah looked like she had just run a marathon through a minefield. Her impeccable hair was slightly askew, and there was genuine terror in her eyes. "Mr. Cross," she gasped, trying to catch her breath. "Mr. Adrian Cross, on behalf of Orion Airways. Oh my God, I am so sorry. There has been a terrible, catastrophic misunderstanding." Beatrice stepped forward, her jaw dropped. "Sarah, what are you doing? He's a disruptor. He's—" "Shut up, Beatrice," Sarah snapped, not even looking at her. The venom in her voice was colder than anything Beatrice had managed all night. "You have done enough. You have absolutely no idea what you've done." Sarah turned back to Adrian, her hands clasped together, almost in prayer. "We received a call from your chief legal officer, and then a call from our CEO, Mr. Sterling. Please, Mr. Cross, we can fix this. We can get you to London. Just, please, turn the plane back on." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted so violently that the air pressure seemed to change. Moments ago, Beatrice Reynolds had been the queen of her domain, wielding her authority like a cudgel. Now, she looked like a wax figure, left too close to a fire, melting, sagging, and terrified. Sarah Jenkins, the station manager, didn't wait for Adrian to answer her plea. She turned on her heel, her eyes blazing with a fury that made Sergeant Kowalski take a step back. "Beatrice," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "Get your bag." Beatrice blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Sarah, you can't be serious. I was following protocol. He was non-compliant. I was protecting the brand." "Protecting the brand?" Sarah let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "You just cost us millions of dollars in potential lease litigation in under 20 minutes. You insulted a key strategic partner of this airline, and you humiliated a paying first-class passenger based on nothing but your own bias. You didn't protect the brand, Beatrice. You set it on fire." "But, Mr. Hargrave," Beatrice stammered, looking toward Preston for support. Preston Hargrave, seeing the tide turn, did what cowards always do. He threw his accomplice under the bus. "Now hold on," Preston said, raising his hands and stepping away from Beatrice. "I didn't tell her to do anything. I just asked if my usual seat was open. She's the one who went crazy. She's the one who threatened the kid. I was just standing here." Beatrice gasped, the betrayal hitting her harder than the realization of her job loss. "You liar. You told me to get him out. You called him ground crew. You said you wouldn't sit in 2B. "I don't recall that," Preston lied smoothly, though sweat was beading on his upper lip as he noticed the red recording lights of a dozen smartphones still pointed at him. "I think this flight attendant is unstable. I'm a victim here too, really." Adrian finally spoke. He hadn't moved from his spot near the bulkhead. He looked at Sarah Jenkins. "Ms. Jenkins," Adrian said, "I'm willing to reauthorize the flight systems. I don't want to strand these other passengers. They didn't do anything wrong. In fact, Ms. Cole here," he nodded to the woman in 2A, "was very kind." "Thank you, Mr. Cross," Sarah exhaled, her shoulders dropping in relief. "We can upgrade you to—" "I don't need an upgrade," Adrian interrupted. "I have the seat I paid for. But I have conditions." "Anything," Sarah said instantly. "Name it." "First," Adrian pointed a finger at Beatrice. "She leaves, immediately, and not just off this plane. I want her stripped of her badge before she exits the terminal. She is a liability to every passenger of color who steps on this airline." Sarah nodded grimly. "Consider it done. She is relieved of duty, effective immediately pending a termination review." Second, Adrian turned his gaze to Preston Hargrave. Preston stiffened. "Now look here. I'm a Diamond Medallion member. You can't just—" "I want him off," Adrian said, his voice hard as steel. "He instigated this. He harassed me. And quite frankly, I don't feel safe flying with a man who thinks his status card gives him the right to bully people. If he stays, the plane stays grounded." Sarah didn't hesitate for a second. She turned to the police officers. "Sergeant Kowalski, please escort Mr. Hargrave off the aircraft. He is being denied transport due to disruptive behavior and harassment." "You can't do this!" Preston roared, his face turning a deep, ugly purple. "Do you know who I am? I will sue this airline into the ground. I will buy this airline just to fire you." "Sir, let's go," Kowalski said, grabbing Preston's arm with significantly less gentleness than he had used on Adrian. "Get your hands off me!" Preston shouted, flailing as he was dragged toward the door. "Beatrice, tell them I'm a VIP!" But Beatrice couldn't speak. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. She reached for her tote bag in the galley, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it, spilling her personal items, lipstick, a mirror, a breath spray, across the galley floor. Nobody helped her pick them up. The first-class cabin, usually a place of polite disinterest, was now a coliseum. As Preston was dragged past row 3, someone booed, then someone else. "Good riddance," a voice shouted from economy comfort. "Bye-bye, Peacock," another voice yelled. Beatrice gathered her things, clutching her bag to her chest. She had to walk past Adrian to get to the exit. She stopped for a brief second, looking up at him. She wanted to say something nasty, something to hurt him. But when she met his eyes, she saw nothing but absolute, crushing indifference. He didn't hate her. He just didn't care about her anymore. She was beneath his notice. She hurried off the plane, the clicking of her heels sounding like the ticking clock on her career. As soon as they were gone, Sarah Jenkins turned to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Orion Airways, I deeply apologize for this scene. To compensate you for the delay and the unpleasantness, we are issuing a $500 travel voucher to every passenger on this aircraft. And for our first-class cabin, we will be serving Dom Perignon immediately upon takeoff." A cheer went up from the cabin. Sarah looked at Adrian. "Mr. Cross, is there anything else?" Adrian pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen, entering a secure key. "Systems are live," Adrian said quietly. "Have a safe flight, Miss Jenkins." He sat down in seat 1A, put his noise-cancelling headphones back on, and pulled his hood up. He was asleep before the plane even pushed back from the gate. While Flight 492 was cruising at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, a different kind of storm was brewing on the ground. The video Lydia Cole had recorded, and 3 other angles from other passengers, had hit the internet. By the time the sun set in New York, the hashtag #Flight492 was trending #1 globally on X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok. The video was damning. It showed everything: Beatrice's sneering condescension, Preston's arrogant bullying, and the shocking reveal of Adrian's identity. But the internet didn't just watch, it investigated. In the 21st century, there is no such thing as privacy for people who go viral for the wrong reasons. Within 2 hours, the Peacock had been identified as Preston Hargrave of Hargrave Venture Capital. Preston was sitting in the back of an Uber, fuming, on his way back to his Manhattan apartment when his phone began to vibrate. It wasn't a text. It was a call from his biggest investor, a man named Marcus Thorne, who ran a pension fund worth billions. Preston answered, trying to sound composed. "Marcus, I was just about to call you. I had a little travel hiccup, but—" "Shut up, Preston." Marcus's voice was ice cold. "I'm looking at a video of you screaming at a kid in a hoodie, a kid who happens to be Adrian Cross." "It's taken out of context," Preston lied desperately. "He was aggressive. Adrian Cross just signed a defense contract with the Pentagon last week, Preston," Marcus interrupted. "He is the golden boy of aerospace, and you are on video abusing him. Do you know what the comments are saying? They are calling you a racist, classist relic." "It'll blow over," Preston said, though his stomach was churning. "It won't," Marcus said. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. We are pulling our capital, Preston, all of it. We can't be associated with you. The brand toxicity is too high. You're done." The line went dead. Preston stared at the phone. That fund was 60% of his operating capital. Without it, he was insolvent. Before he could process that, another email pinged. It was from the legal team at Orion Airways. It wasn't an apology. It was a notice of a lifetime ban from the airline and its partners, and a notification that they were suing him for the cost of the ground delay and reputational damages. Preston Hargrave arrived at his luxury apartment building just in time to see a news van parked out front. He covered his face and ran inside, his empire crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, in a stark, fluorescent-lit office in the bowels of JFK, Beatrice Reynolds was sitting across from a human resources director and a union representative. "We have reviewed the footage," the HR director said, pushing a tablet across the desk, "and we have reviewed your file. This is not the first complaint about your attitude toward passengers who don't fit a certain profile." "I was doing my job," Beatrice whispered, clutching a tissue. "I was managing the cabin." "You violated 17 different company policies," the HR director said, listing them off. "Harassment, profiling, unauthorized physical contact with a passenger, escalation of conflict, and gross insubordination to the station manager. But the worst part, Beatrice, is that you lied. You lied to the captain and you lied to the police. That creates a liability we cannot insure. I've given you 20 years, Beatrice sobbed. I have a pension. You had a pension, the union rep said softly, shaking his head. Beatrice, you were terminated for gross misconduct. Under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, you lose the severance package. We can fight for the pension, but with that video, it's going to be impossible. The HR director stood up. Please hand over your badge, your ID, and your uniform scarf. Beatrice's hands shook as she unpinned the silver wings from her lapel, the wings she had been so proud of. She placed them on the desk with a hollow clack. She was escorted out of the airport through the employee exit into the rainy night. She didn't have a ride. She didn't have a job. And thanks to the internet, her name was now synonymous with bigotry. She stood on the curb, watching the planes take off overhead, realizing she would likely never step foot on one again. 6 months had passed since the rain-soaked tarmac at JFK became the stage for the viral collapse of 2 egos and the rise of a silent titan. The internet moves fast, usually burying stories within a week, but the incident on Flight 492 had dug itself into the cultural consciousness. It wasn't just a viral video anymore. It was a case study taught in business schools and HR seminars across the country. In London, the grand ballroom of the Savoy Hotel was bathed in the soft, golden glow of chandeliers. It was the annual Global Aviation Summit, a gathering of the most powerful people in aerospace. The room fell into a respectful hush as the keynote speaker approached the podium. Adrian Cross looked different than he had in the grainy cell phone footage. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, but he didn't wear a tie. It was a subtle nod to his refusal to be entirely boxed in by tradition. Disruption, Adrian began, his voice amplified clearly across the room. We usually use that word to talk about technology, about engines, algorithms, and microprocessors. But 6 months ago, I learned that the most expensive disruption in the aviation industry isn't mechanical failure. It's human arrogance. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. Seated in the front row was Sarah Jenkins, the station manager who had saved the day. She had been promoted to Vice President of Customer Experience at Orion Airways. Next to her was Lydia Cole, the young woman who had stood up for Adrian on the plane. Adrian had not forgotten her. When he learned she was a struggling graphic design student, the Cross Aero Foundation had quietly paid off her tuition and offered her a spot in their creative department. Today, Adrian continued, I am proud to announce that Cross Aero is acquiring a 12% stake in Orion Airways. We aren't just providing the navigation systems anymore. We are rewriting the protocol. The Invisible Passenger initiative starts today, because you never know if the person in the hoodie is the one signing your paycheck. The applause was thunderous. It was a victory lap, not just for Adrian, but for everyone who had ever been judged by their cover. But while champagne corks popped in London, the reality for the antagonists of Flight 492 was a stark, gritty contrast. In Lower Manhattan, the air was cold and smelled of exhaust. Preston Hargrave stood on the sidewalk outside what used to be his building. He wasn't wearing his tan suit or his pink tie. He was wearing a heavy, ill-fitting coat he had bought at a surplus store. He pulled the collar up, not to block the wind, but to hide his face. The Hargrave Venture Capital sign had been scraped off the glass doors of the office lobby weeks ago. The lawsuit from Orion Airways had been a sledgehammer. They hadn't just sued for the delay, they had sued for breach of contract and damages to the brand's integrity. Coupled with the withdrawal of Marcus Thorne's billions, Preston had been forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. He watched as a team of movers rolled a cart out of the service entrance. On it was his custom mahogany desk, the one he used to put his feet up on while screaming at subordinates. Next to it was his ergonomic leather chair. They were being loaded into a truck marked Office Liquidators. Preston felt a vibration in his pocket. It was a notification from a job search app. Application status rejected. It was the 15th rejection this week. No reputable firm would hire the Peacock. He was a liability. His name was radioactive. He checked his bank balance, $412. He had a bus to catch to New Jersey, where he was sleeping on a pull-out couch in his sister's basement, under the strict condition that he didn't speak to her husband. As he walked toward the subway, a group of finance bros in expensive suits brushed past him, laughing. Preston shrank away, terrified they might recognize him. They didn't. To them, he was nobody. He was exactly what he had called Adrian, invisible. Miles away, in a strip mall near LaGuardia Airport, the fluorescent lights of Burger Barn buzzed with an annoying, high-pitched hum. The air was thick with the smell of old grease and floor cleaner. Beatrice Reynolds stood behind the counter, staring at the digital register. Her feet ached. She wasn't wearing her Italian leather heels anymore. She was wearing slip-resistant black sneakers that were 2 sizes too wide. Her uniform was a polyester polo shirt that scratched her neck, complete with a name tag that simply said, Beatrice, trainee. There was no first-class cabin here. There was no power to wield. There was only a line of impatient, hungry customers who didn't care about her 20 years of seniority. "Hey, lady!" a man in construction gear yelled, tapping a coin on the counter. "I said no pickles. You deaf?" Beatrice flinched. The old Beatrice would have withered this man with a look. She would have called security. She would have had him removed. But the new Beatrice, stripped of her wings and her pension, just looked down at the tray. "I'm sorry, sir," she mumbled, her voice trembling. "I'll fix it." She took the burger back to the kitchen, scraping off the pickles with a plastic knife. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring her vision. She thought about the silence of the cockpit, the view of the clouds from 30,000 feet, the respect she used to command. She had thrown it all away for a moment of power over a stranger. As she handed the tray back, a group of teenagers at a corner booth started giggling. One of them held up a phone. Beatrice froze. She knew that look. She knew that whispers. "Yo, isn't that the lady?" one kid whispered loud enough to carry. "The one from the plane video? The one who got owned by the CEO?" "No way," another kid laughed. "That lady was rich. This one's serving fries." Beatrice turned her back to them, pretending to wipe down the soda machine. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could disappear. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than any luggage she had ever lifted. She realized then that her punishment wasn't just losing her job. It was living in a world where she had become a punchline. Back in London, the gala was winding down. Adrian walked out onto the balcony of the Savoy, looking out over the Thames River. The cool night air felt good. He took out his phone. He had one unread email. It was from the legal team handling the final settlement with Preston Hargrave. Subject: Settlement finalized. Body: Mr. Hargrave has liquidated all assets. The settlement covers the legal fees. but the remaining $50,000 you requested from his personal liquidation has been secured. Adrian hit reply. Transfer the full amount to the United Negro College Fund and the Aviation Access Scholarship. Anonymous donation. He put the phone away. He didn't need the money. He needed the lesson to be cemented in history. A plane soared overhead, its lights blinking against the dark sky, beginning its descent into Heathrow. Adrian watched it, a small smile playing on his lips. Somewhere up there, a crew was working. Somewhere up there, passengers were sleeping. And hopefully, somewhere up there, a flight attendant was looking at a young man in a hoodie and asking him if he needed a glass of water rather than asking him to move. He turned back toward the warmth of the party. The plane kept flying, steady and true, navigating the darkness, guided by systems he had built and protected by a lesson he had taught the world. What an incredible journey of justice served cold. Adrian Cross proved that true power doesn't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes it just needs to click a button on a smartphone. While Preston and Beatrice learned the hard way that arrogance is a one-way ticket to ruin, Adrian showed us that staying calm is the ultimate power move. It's a powerful reminder that we should treat everyone with respect, whether they're wearing a bespoke suit or a comfortable hoodie, because you never know who you're talking to. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and massive revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What would you have done if you were in Adrian's seat? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.